So good morning, everyone. Happy Diwali. Our mother church is the Vedanta Society of Southern California, and tonight the Swami will be performing a Kali Puja, a regular Kali Puja that has taken place ever since the 1940s. When Swami Prabhavananda came to Hollywood in the early 1940s, he worshipped a picture of the Dakshineshwar Kali. Then in the late 40s, Swami Brahmananda, his guru, appeared to him in vision, and he told him to start Kali Puja. And Swami was a little worried. At that time, we had a convent in Santa Barbara and a monastery in Hollywood. He said, well, to Maharaj, what about the monks and the nuns? And Maharaj went like this. In other words, bring them together. At that time, it will be fine. And so ever since 1948, a fresh image is always worshipped at Kali Puja time in the Southern California Center, along with a homophire that follows. And we in the Santa Barbara convent would be driving back to Santa Barbara at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. So if you ever have the desire for a real Kali Puja in this country, in the Ramakrishna order, that center would be the place to go. Today's topic is forms of divine love. And it's the 9th in a series on the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and it seems very appropriate for Diwali. Just a quick review for those of you who've been following this series. In Sutra 51, Narada explained the real nature of this love, this divine love, is inexpressible. So we might ask, how does one know that one has attained it? Because the devotion itself within will make one aware that one has attained it. We strive for devotion, but when the Lord comes, he or she manifests in the heart, and we are well aware. Swami Vivekananda said, when this supreme love once comes into the heart of man, his mind will continuously think of God and remember nothing else. So there's no pull. Even while engaged in ordinary activities, that love carries one through the actions of the day. He will give no room in himself to thoughts other than those of God, and his soul will be unconquerably pure and will alone break all the bonds of mind and matter and become serenely free. So that is a state of divine love. And that love can only be felt within. It's not expressed outwardly. Those who claim, our teachers tell us, have not had. But the real bhakta keeps that love hidden within. Sri Ramakrishna gave the example. The bee buzzes as long as it is not sitting on a flower. It becomes silent when it begins to sip the honey. But sometimes, intoxicated with the honey, it buzzes again. So though supreme love is inexpressible, great souls who inhabit that state make those around them feel how near and attainable it is. Yes, a God-realized soul makes us feel that it is a fruit in the palm of our hand, that near. So it emanates from their being. It lifts us up and touches the hearts of anyone who comes within their orbit. Swami Prabhavananda explained, you didn't have to be pure-hearted or spiritually minded to love Maharaj, his teacher, Swami Brahmananda. Even the most depraved natures felt this love when they came into his presence, and many of them were transformed into saints. Maharaj did not talk to everybody about God or spiritual matters or philosophical truths. He would come down, as it were, to the level of each individual. He became that person. He had the power to uplift a person without his even knowing it. He became that person. And when that person left his presence, he was bathed in love and purity. Swami went on, when you were in the presence of Maharaj, you completely forgot yourself. You felt you were in another world where there was no worry or grief and where man was not man, but divine. You were filled with a peculiar joy which you could neither explain nor understand. So this is the power of that divine love. Another beautiful example he used to give was of Boshi Sen. Boshi Sen was an amazing devotee. He was involved in the experiments of consciousness within plants with Jagadish. He had a younger brother, Tabu, and Tabu was loved by Sarada Devi, Maharaj, and all the direct disciples of Ramakrishna. But once he did something he shouldn't have done, and afterwards he felt so guilty, he avoided Maharaj. He would visit younger swamis, and then he would slip away. But one day Maharaj caught him. He said, Tabu, do you know that buffaloes have big horns where flies can sit, and the buffaloes don't feel anything? Maharaj opened his arms wide. I have big horns like that. So that is divine love. Sutra 54. This supreme love is devoid of attributes. It is free from all selfish desires. It grows in intensity every moment. It is an unbroken inner experience, subtler than the subtlest. Vivekananda boldly stated, realization of love comes to none unless one becomes a perfect jnani. Yes, jnani and bhakta are not, jnana and bhakti are not separate. Does not the Vedanta say that Brahman is Satchit Ananda, the absolute existence, knowledge, bliss? He explained, the phrase Satchitananda means Sat, existence, Chit, consciousness or knowledge, and Ananda, bliss, which is the same as love. There is no controversy between Bhakta and Jnani regarding the Sat aspect of Brahman. Only the Jnanis will lay greater stress on his aspect of Chit or knowledge, while the Bhaktas keep the aspect of Ananda, love, more in view. But no sooner is the essence of, this is very important, no sooner is the essence of Chit realized than the essence of Ananda is also realized, because what is Chit is verily the same as Ananda. So there is no such thing as a dry jnani. Swami Vivekananda was a jnani par excellence, and what devotion he had. Para bhakti, what devotion. Sutra 55. When one attains this supreme love, one sees his beloved everywhere. He hears of him everywhere. He talks only of him, and he thinks of him only. So what is the nature of that love? One desires nothing else but that love. It is beyond description. It is better than the best dessert that we've ever eaten. It is something that we cannot live without. So what then is the difference between human love and this divine love? Para bhakti is complete absorption in that love. Every moment it increases in volume. Vivekananda again. Ordinarily, human love is seen to flourish only in places where it is returned. Is it not? We love someone, we expect love in return. Where love is not returned for love, cold indifference is the natural result. There are, however, rare instances in which we may notice love exhibiting itself even when there is no return of love. we may compare this kind of love for purposes of illustration to the love of the moth for the fire. The insect loves the fire, falls into it, and dies. It is indeed in the nature of this insect to love so. To love, because it is the nature of love to love, is undeniably the highest and the most unselfish manifestation of love that may be seen in the world. So we see this in the great incarnations of God and in their disciples as well. So what is the fruit of this love? Parabhakti, supreme love, culminates in self-realization. One realizes the soul of all souls, the soul of one's soul. And one further realizes that nothing exists but God. Who can attain parabhakti? It's called prema. Prema is the rarest love of God. Sri Ramakrishna explains it's not given to everybody to feel prema, ecstatic love of God. Chaitanya experienced it. An ordinary man can at the most experience bhava. So we see there are stages of love. Only the Ishvara Kotis, such as the divine incarnations, experience prema. When prema is awakened, the devotee not only feels the world to be unreal, but forgets even the body, which everyone loves so intensely. So to get a glimpse of this parabhakti, we can read the lives of Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, Vivekananda, Swami Brahmananda, some of the direct disciples as well. For ordinary souls like us, bhakti or preparatory devotion is the highest possible attainment, but that in itself is completely fulfilling. So here, Sri Ramakrishna explains the various stages of bhakti. He says, according to this path, first comes bhakti, then bhava, when bhakti is mature. Higher than bhava is mahabhava, and then prema. An ordinary mortal does not attain mahabhava and prema. He who has achieved these has realized the goal, that is to say, has attained God. But what matters for us is not the scale of one's bhakti, but to plumb the very depths of bhakti and thus completely fill the capacity of our vessel. So there are various divisions amongst devotees according to their predominating motivation, exemplified in any one of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. The sattvic devotee has one ideal, to realize God. And the prayer of such a devotee is to have pure knowledge and devotion. The rajasic devotee devotes himself or herself to God for material success, good health, and prosperity. See? The devotee prays for such. The tamasic devotee has only a Sunday religion. He or she attends church regularly. Now, don't go away. Contributes financially to the church and behaves morally. So these are the three stages of bhakti. In other words, bhakti is not just a Sunday service. It's more than that. It's what we take home with us. It's how we live our lives. It's the role model for our life. It is there within us, guides our actions. So Ramakrishna also described the three classes of devotees according to the depth and ascending subtlety of their mental makeup. He stated, there are three kinds of devotee: superior, mediocre, and inferior. The inferior devotee says God is out there. According to him or her, God is different from his creation. The mediocre devotee, on the other hand, says God is the antaryami, the inner God. God dwells in everyone's heart. The mediocre devotee sees God in the heart. And that's not a mediocre attainment by any means. But the superior devotee sees that God alone has become everything. He alone has become the 24 cosmic principles. He finds that everything above and below is filled with God. When we read this or hear this, it's hard to even imagine. But for a sincere devotee, we must try to imagine when we read Sri Ramakrishna explaining to us what devotion is, what knowledge is. Try to feel. Vivekananda used to say, can you feel? That will take you where logic and reasoning can't. So that trying to feel these truths is something, an action we need to put into our spiritual reading and when we're listening as well. So any stage of devotion is a good starting point because it will eventually advance all of us to the next successive stage in our spiritual evolution. Now we come to the forms of divine love. Sutra 58. And if you don't have a Narada Bhakti Sutras, we have them outside the door here. You can follow along. Sutra 58. Narada tells us, the path of devotion is the easiest way to attain God. Why? Because it's our nature to love. No one here will tell me they don't know how to love. We all know how to love, whether it's our children, our spouse, our friends, our guru, or people in general. We have a loving nature, people in general. And whether we know it or not, we are actually loving God, even in our worldly attachments. Yes, there is an ounce of that divine love there. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, this famous verses, when Yajnavalkya is explaining to his wife, Maitreyi, it is not for the sake of the husband, my beloved, that the husband is dear, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the wife, my beloved, that the wife is dear, but for the sake of the wife, of the self. It is not for the sake of creatures that they are dear, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of itself that anything whatsoever is dear, but for the sake of the self. Swami Asheshananda, disciple of Holy Mother, he put it in his own words. And if you were with him, you felt that connection. He said, husband and wife are like cup and saucer. There's an inextricable bond there. And so the opportunity to try to serve as the beloved, as the self and all is there, right there within reach. Swami Vivekananda explains, the Vedanta philosophy says that even in the love of the husband and wife, although the wife is thinking that she is loving the husband, the real attraction is the Lord who is present there. That's the real attraction. We can't see it, but a holy person could see that. Cup and saucer, they go together. He is the only attraction. He goes on, there is no other. But the wife in most cases does not know that it is so, but ignorantly she is doing the right thing, which is loving the Lord. Only when one does it ignorantly, it may bring pain. If one does it knowingly, that is salvation. This is what our scriptures say. Wherever there is love, wherever there is a spark of joy, know that to be a spark of his presence, because he is joy. He is blessedness and love itself. Without that, there cannot be any love. So yes. So in Bhakti Yoga, a lay devotee deliberately superimposes Lord into the heart of the spouse and trains oneself to direct one's love to that ideal over and above human love. And that way, worldly love is transposed into the divine, and in doing so, the devotee and spouse become transformed. But this takes time. And our teachers do not tell newly married couples to practice this. No, there is a natural progression in married life. And so that is, the guru can guide in those matters. So eventually, in your later years, you come to that understanding and you develop spiritually as an aspirant, both husband and wife. Sutra 59. Love is its own proof and does not require any other. So love doesn't depend upon any proof. It's its own proof. It is self-evident. Whereas in other paths, doubts may come. For example, in karma yoga, we may wonder, will this action bring me the desired result? Karma yoga means selfless action. And through selfless action, we purify oneself and spiritual insight opens up. So this is a doubt that may come. Jnana yoga depends upon the force of argument, intellectual development. In other words, what is a proof that one's logic is directing one towards the goal? And that's a legitimate question, because to be a real jnani, one must have a rigorous intellect, and not just an intellect up here, but also impelling one's actions as well. Otherwise, the intellect is flimsy. But in the path of devotion, bhakti is self-evident. But what if it is delusional, we might ask? If it does not disappear, then it is not delusional. Swami Bhuteshananda, one of the presidents of the order, explained, suppose I am seeing a snake in the rope. That's an old, very old Vedantic example, explaining Maya. It is a delusion, but we call it a delusion only when I see the rope and not the snake again. That is the spell of delusion that it must break at some time. If we continue to see the snake, then we're still delusional. Only when we can see the rope itself, when daylight comes, then the delusion breaks. He goes on, but this emotion, which we call devotion, the absorption of the devotee in the love of God, never breaks. So this lasting spell cannot be called a delusion. Such devotion does not depend upon any proof. It's immediate and self-evident. One feels it within. There's no mistake. Sutra 60. Its nature is peace and supreme bliss. A devotee experiences bhakti within the heart, and this experience needs no proof. And the nature of this bhakti is peace and supreme bliss. The peace that passeth all understanding, Christ said. That peace. As supreme bliss, Sri Ramakrishna explained, the bhakti scriptures describe this very world as a mansion of mirth. In his life, we see how often he explains this. To him, this world was a mansion of mirth when he was at that level. Sri Ramakrishna again said, God of Bhakta is full of sweetness. That's why Sri Krishna is called the Sweet One. full of sweetness. As peace, Sri Ramakrishna described, yoga is impossible unless the mind becomes quiet. The mind of a yogi is under his control. He is not under the control of his mind. When the mind is quiet, the prana stops functioning. Then one gets kumbhaka. One may have kumbhaka through bhakti yoga. The prana stops functioning through love of God. And for those who are adept in spirituality, that kumbhaka can come anytime. And the disciples, the direct disciples, we could witness in their lives that stage of kumbhaka. One disciple of Maharaj explained to us that once when he went in to have surgery, prostate surgery, at the point of the surgery, he lost consciousness. And the doctor thought he had died on the operating table. And he put a sheet over his body, and they wheeled him out. And at one point, the Swami threw off the sheet, and it scared the nurses and the doctors. So we're not at that level. If you were the disciple of a direct disciple, yes, maybe. But this explains that it can come at any time. But that does not mean that the lover of God will reach one goal and the philosopher and worker another. It means that if a person seeks the knowledge of Brahman, he can attain it by following the path of bhakti too. God, who loves his devotee, can give him the knowledge of Brahman if he so desires. So yes, this path of bhakti is also the path to knowledge. You see, in spiritual life, as Swami Yogatmananda beautifully explained, one of the great Swamis of our order, Swami Bhaskar said, in spiritual life, you need the sharpness of the intellect, but then also you need the strength of the will. Okay, so what provides that will with strength? Devotion. It comes naturally. When you're offered, tiramisu, would you take a banana? No. You have the will to take the tiramisu. So the devotion comes naturally. It gives us that will. And the nature of that experience is the peace that passeth all understanding. It's not a raucous love. No, it's a bliss that is felt within. In this love, there is no desire. It is nothing but pure love of the lotus feet of God. Shanta bhava, the serene attitude. Though through bhava, a man becomes speechless, his nerve currents are stilled. Kumbhaka comes by itself. It is like the case of a man whose breath and speech stop when he fires a gun. Sutra 61. Narada tells us, the devotee does not grieve at any personal loss, for he has surrendered himself everything he has, and even the rites and ceremonies which are enjoined by the scriptures. Swami Brahmananda once pointed out, it is no easy thing to dedicate oneself, heart and soul, to the Lord. It's just not. Many people boast, I have surrendered myself and my all to God. I do only what he tells me to do. But if we observe their lives, we see differently. For the good they do, they claim the credit, and they boast of their achievements. But when adversity or trouble overtakes them, they cry out against the Lord and blame him for their misfortunes. See? Spiritual life is very tricky. And that's why when you have spiritual friends or you're in a spiritualized family or in a spiritualized relationship, you have a looking glass to see you. And certainly in a monastic community, there are members of the community, and all of these members rub the corners off of you so that you know who you are, what you've attained, what you've not attained. So it's so many mirrors where you can see yourself through many different people. So what prevents us from self-surrender? Vivekananda says, it is the horrible body idea that breeds all the selfishness in the world. Just this one delusion that we are wholly the body we own, and that we must by all possible means try our very best to preserve and to please it. If you know that you are positively other than your body, you have then none to fight with or struggle against. You are dead to all ideas of selfishness. Now, when we're young, the body idea is very, very strong. We're also aware that we are the mind, or we think we are the mind, but we're neither the body nor the mind, Vedanta tells us. Who is it that watches the mind? Mind is an object of observation, and science tells us that what we can observe is material. So we know as Vedantins that we are neither the body nor the mind. Vivekananda goes on. So the Bhakta declares that we have to hold ourselves as if we are altogether dead to all the things of the world. And that is indeed self-surrender. Let things come as they may. This is the meaning of thy will be done. Thy will be done. Not going about fighting and struggling and thinking all the while that God wills all our own weaknesses and worldly ambitions. He continues, it may be that good comes even out of our selfish struggles. That is, however, God's lookout. The perfected bhakta's idea must be never to will and work for himself or herself. The peace of the bhakta's realm, of the bhakta's calm resignation, is a state of sublime resignation. Everything in the shape of attachment goes away completely, except that one all-absorbing love to him in whom all things live and move and have their being. This attachment of love to God is indeed one that does not bind the soul, but effectively breaks all its bondages. Now we're talking about an extreme love, but we as spiritual aspirants begin where we are. But it's good, just as when you apply to a college, it's good to know where you can go in your college, how far you can go intellectually. And it's also good to know in your spiritual life how far you can go, how far you can elevate yourself. But we begin where we are. Surrender is a lifetime process. So how do we begin to surrender? Surrendering to a genuine guru from a bona fide and renowned spiritual tradition is the first step in an aspirant's long journey towards self-surrender. That's the first step. Vivekananda tells us the one thing necessary is to be stripped of our vanities, the sense that we possess any spiritual wisdom, and to surrender ourselves completely to the guidance of our guru. The guru only knows what will lead us toward perfection. We are quite blind to it. We do not know anything. So this is uncharted territory that we enter into. So we need, just as we need in college, a good professor, a bona fide professor to teach us whatever it is we want to learn. Also in spiritual life, we need a proper guru, a teacher. This sort of humility will open the door of our heart for spiritual truths, Vivekananda tells us. Truth will never come into our minds so long as there will remain the faintest shadow of ahamkara. Now, there was no intellect above Vivekananda's brilliance. We see this in his talks. When we read them, they make us sit up straight. The power that comes off the page, the brilliance, how he integrates ideas, what kind of mind, a luminous mind. But his guru was Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda stressed this point to his students. All of you should try to root out this devil from your heart. Complete self-surrender is the only way to spiritual illumination. And once we step on the train, whether we're asleep or not, whether we struggle a little bit or struggle a great deal, the train is moving. Once you come within the orbit of a tradition that you trust and step into the ocean of that tradition, then you begin to progress. And the beauty is that you cannot see your own progression, but those around you can see. And from my own experience being here, those devotees that come every week religiously, I see them when they first came, and after a year, after 2 years, after 3 years, I see how much they have changed. It's really thrilling to see. It really gives one faith. Sarada Devi gives us a mother's assurance. Everything will come in time, my child, she said. Be devoted to him and take shelter at his feet. It is enough to remember that there is someone, call him father or mother, who is always protecting you. And Sri Ramakrishna also stressed the gradual, natural process of surrender. When hearing the name of Hari or Rama once, you shed tears and your hair stands on end. Then you may know for certain that you do not have to perform such devotions as the Sandhya anymore. Then rituals will drop away of themselves. Then it will be enough if you repeat only the name of Rama or Hari, or even simply Om. He ended by saying, the Sandhya merges in the Gayatri, and the Gayatri merges in Om. Sutra 62, Narada explains, even though the devotee may have surrendered himself utterly to the Lord, he must not renounce action in the world, but continue to perform it, giving up the fruits of action to the Lord. So Sri Krishna says in the Gita, 3rd chapter, verses 22 to 24, consider me. I am not bound by any sort of duty. There is nothing in all the 3 worlds which I do not already possess. Nothing I have yet to acquire. But I go on working nevertheless. If I did not continue to work untiringly as I do, mankind would still follow me, no matter where I led them. But suppose I were to stop, they would all be lost. And certainly, we have this ideal of karma yoga. We see Sri Krishna where? On a battlefield. What greater performance of karma yoga can there be, requiring intensity of concentration? Swami Prabhupada explained the ideal of service in the world in his Gita commentary. Though illumined souls have no duty, they act in order that others will imitate their actions and thus follow the path to perfection. There are 3 types of spiritual actions, he explained. Physical service, such as the charitable provision of food, clothing, and medicine. Intellectual service, such as education and training. And service related to supplying people's spiritual needs. Such service can be administered by preaching without words. preaching without words. That means silently becoming absorbed in the consciousness of God. And to live such a life changes the world. Thoughts have great power, the Swami says. They live in the atmosphere. They spread far beyond any walls, and they can touch the hearts of people in any part of the world. And so to live an exemplary life is the supreme service. But the important fact is twofold: to surrender all fruits of our actions to God, and second, to work without any motive other than love of God. That polishes the mind and purifies the heart. So we might ask, how can we begin to perform this high-minded form of service? Preaching without words. Vivekananda describes the secret life changer. He says, nothing makes us work so well, at our best and highest, as when all responsibility is thrown upon ourselves. Now, most of you are professional people, so you know what that means. For example, he says, how will you behave if I put a little baby in your hands? Your whole life will be changed for the moment. Whatever you may be, you must become selfless for the time being. As responsibility is thrown upon you, he continues, your whole character will change. So if the whole responsibility is thrown upon our own shoulders, we shall be at our highest and best. Vivekananda explains, when we have nobody to grope towards, no devil to lay our blame upon, no personal God to carry our burdens, when we are alone responsible, then we shall rise to our highest and best. A second secret Vivekananda describes, the means of karma yoga is also the end. The means are the end. Here is the ideal, he states. When a man has no more self in him, no possession, nothing to call me or mine, has given himself up entirely, destroyed himself as it were, in that man is God himself. For in him, self-will is gone, crushed out, annihilated. That is the ideal man. That ideal has to be preached. For it is not only the end, but also the means. To be unselfish, perfectly selfless, is salvation itself. For the man within dies, and God alone remains. Now, Vivekananda's karma yoga was, as he said, his greatest work. It really is something to read and reread. And we may wonder now, is that so hard to act in the way he has just told us? But we had a vivid example of this in our Santa Barbara convent. In our Santa Barbara Center, there was one such devotee, Stephen Berg, who came to live on our convent property as its foreman without pay. He was a devotee. He'd been in the Fiji Center of the Ramakrishna Mission. And then when he hit 40, he started to investigate the different centers that had good surf. He was a surfer. And he discovered that Santa Barbara had really good surf. Our center in Santa Barbara is in the National Forest, and it's 10 minutes from the Pacific Ocean. So you can imagine, Stephen was kept very busy. But there was no job, however thankless, he would not do, from planting the center's 50-acre hillsides with wildflowers, to cleaning out the rat traps in our open-air temple and around our convent dorms, to serving as our center's weekly nighttime proctor at Transition House, a charity for the homeless. Stephen chose to become a humble mail carrier. He chose that above all other vocations, so he was trained in forestry, etc. He was very smart. Why? Because he could daily carry his pocket Gita with him on his mail route and memorize the sutras as he delivered the mail. His Gita meditations elevated his spirit of service. And after Stephen's passing just a few years ago, so many people on his mail route and our firefighters, who are our dear friends, they've saved our temple so many times during forest fires, stepped forward to share their stories of Stephen's generosity, kindness, and selfless service to those he treated like family. The whole world he met, whether on his mail route or who visited the temple, became his own. Holy Mother's last words, make the whole world your own. That is the highest Vedanta. So karma yoga expanded his sense of being far beyond that of just an acquaintance to that of a friend, a well-wisher, a brother and benefactor, a caretaker of the temple grounds, and our Sunday temple doorman and greeter, a lover of plants and all creatures who came within his orbit. Stephen's only desire was to do good. Is that a desire? Yes, it is, but not a selfish desire. He had no desire to gain anything by his actions. Therefore, his actions will bear fruits, but the fruits will not have gone to him. The fruits were attained by others. Stephen's presence is still missed. Sutra 63, Narada tells us, conversations about lust, greed, and atheism should be avoided. Now, in a previous aphorism, Narada advised the aspirant to shun evil company. Now here, Narada is warning aspirants to avoid even talk of sex, wealth, or atheism. Now, in today's age, this sounds a little extreme. However, when we begin to study the mind through Raja Yoga, we understand how susceptible the mind is to sense impressions, what we're putting into the mind. We're very careful about the food we eat, but these sense impressions are even more of a food to our mind. Even verbal reminders of such impressions can awaken an avalanche of desires in the mind to those who are unvigilant. So just as holy company arouses sattvic impressions in the mind, so also talk of money, sex, and enemies arouses a negative climate in the mind. So we have to be careful what we feed the mind. So spiritual life is not a part-time job. It's a job that's 24/7. It's a 24/7 vocation of unwavering vigilance and practice. And without that, the mind remains unsteady and unfocused, and in a haphazard and unkempt condition. So we begin by taking baby steps. Don't jump into the pool and say, I'm going to renounce. No. Begin where you are. Just keep a journal of, your activities and what you're engaged in and what throws you off balance, how long it takes for you to recover. I used to share often with our devotees, Swami Swahananda, the founder of the center and a disciple of one of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna. As a young monk, he was told he had a problem with anger. And being a Raja Yogi, what did he do? He kept a journal, telegraphic, so nobody could read it, but he noted down the times when he became angry, how long that anger, what the duration of that anger was, and what put an end to the anger, what technique put an end to the anger. And over time, he conquered anger. So we must be very scientific. This Raja Yoga, this Vedanta, this Bhakti Yoga is all laid out for us by practitioners who have followed the way, and we are following in their footsteps, and we can gain by their examples. So we don't want to keep the mind in a haphazard and unkempt way. Sri Ramakrishna used to give the example of Padmalochan, an aspirant who exemplified an undisciplined and unkempt spiritual life with some sattvic qualities mixed in with tamas. Sri Ramakrishna explained, people used to call him Poto for short. In this village, there was a temple in a very dilapidated condition. It contained no image of God. Aswata and other plants sprang up on the ruins of its walls. Bats lived inside, and the floor was covered with dust and the droppings of the bats. The people of the village had stopped visiting the temple. One day, after dusk, the villagers heard the sound of a conch shell from the direction of the temple. They thought perhaps someone had installed an image in the shrine and was performing the evening worship. One of them softly opened the door and saw Padmalochan standing in a corner, blowing the conch. No image had been set up, the temple hadn't been swept or washed, and filth and dirt lay everywhere. Then he shouted to Poto, "You have set up no image here within the shrine. Oh, fool, blowing the conch, you simply make confusion, worse confounded." So we don't want to be like Padmalochan. Sutra 64. We're coming to an end here. Pride, vanity, and such other vices must be cast out. Now, spiritual pride is very insidious. Yes, we want people to recognize our spiritual greatness. The more vigilant we are about the contents of our mind, the more it will be attracted to the practice of constant remembrance of God. Likewise, without constant vigilance, the climate of the mind can quickly deteriorate. So that's why being in the company of other people, family members, or satsang, or spiritual family, husband and wife, we have wonderful devotee couples and really long-standing devotee couples who really help each other and keeping a vigilance in their spiritual life. So these guidelines are not meant for ordinary people, but for those who are striving for supreme devotion. Without a higher ideal, an aspirant can develop an unhealthy mental complex of suppression. So we don't want that either. However, when an aspirant safeguards the mind from unhealthy impressions by overriding it with a higher ideal, negative impressions are sublimated in a healthy and beneficial way. So you don't get married in order to become monks and nuns. You've chosen a lifestyle. So that in itself, live within the framework of that lifestyle. Let your spouse help you be a co-partner, just as Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother were co-partners in spiritual life. And proceed cautiously, slowly, and steadily along the path. In this connection, pride and vanity are more subtle and devious qualities that we have to give up, more difficult to detect within oneself than more overt qualities such as lust and greed. So our co-companions in spiritual life, let them help us in our spiritual life. Sri Ramakrishna sets a high bar for detecting and rooting out all negative tendencies of the mind. M. wrote in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, while meditating, the master would lay aside his cloth and his Brahminical thread, explaining the strange conduct he once said to Hritoi, "Don't you know that when one thinks of God, one should be freed from all ties? From our very birth, we have the 8 fetters of hatred, shame, lineage, pride of good conduct, fear, secretiveness, caste, and grief. The sacred thread reminds me that I am a Brahmin and therefore superior to all. When calling on the mother, one has to set aside all such ideas. Hriday thought his uncle was becoming insane. But in this connection, Swami Prabhupada explained in his Narada Bhakti Sutras, egotism causes the mind to become restless and uncontrolled. From egotism also arise vanity, pride, and desire for name and fame. All these are the greatest obstacles to the removal of ignorance. The sense of ego, however, is not all bad, he states. The great illumined souls keep their ego of knowledge in order to teach mankind. A spiritual aspirant has to have an ego in order that he can ultimately transcend it. So for him also, there is the ego of knowledge, which makes him long for God and want to love God. Sutra 65. Narada tells us, dedicate all your actions to God and direct all your passions, such as lust, anger, pride, and so forth, toward God. Gradual sublimation is a process best suited to conquering one's passions. Gradual sublimation. First, we must remember that as aspirants, all our activities are meant to serve the Lord only. In that way, when lust, anger, and greed do arise, we must strive to recognize them and then redirect them to the Lord. We can also redirect all negative emotions toward God. For example, we can crave God realization. We can be angry that we have not yet had the vision of God. And we can greedily seek holy company and be proud we are a child of God. With this approach, negative emotions can be gradually attenuated and real devotion arises in the heart. Sri Ramakrishna taught, as the tiger devours other animals, so does the tiger of zeal for the Lord eat up lust, anger, and other passions. And once this zeal grows in the heart, lust and other passions disappear. The gopis of Vrindavan had that state of mind because of their zeal for Sri Krishna. So keep your eyes on the prize. Don't look at what you've done yesterday, but keep your eyes forward, move forward, go forward. Sutra 66. Transcending the three forms of Goni Bhakti, love the Lord and love him as his eternal servant, as his eternal bride. We're ending with this sutra. In Goni Bhakti, the devotee's love for God comes under the spell of the three gunas. The devotee wants something in return for one's devotion. In sattvic devotion, the devotee develops love for God and prays for the Lord to destroy one's negative karmas and protects one from their evil consequences. In rajasic devotion, the devotee performs worship so that the Lord will bless one and also fulfill one's desires. So in this devotion, there's give and take. In tamasic devotion, the devotee worships God for one's own worldly benefit. This is the worst kind of devotion. The devotee then graduates to three forms of devotion that prepare one for supreme love. One may devote oneself to God because he or she feels world weary, because one has unfulfilled desires, or to seek knowledge. But supreme love transcends these three categories and the three gunas, and thereby the devotee realizes that all is vanity except to love God, and accomplishes this by discrimination. How? Swami Prabhupada explains in his sutra commentary. He must not hate the gunas and the moods which are caused by them. You know, some days when we just want to sleep in and we don't want to get out of bed, that's you know, the tamoguna. But it defeats the purpose if we begin to hate the guna. He must not identify himself with the actions that cause him to perform. We're trying to be detached from what we're doing. Be the witness of what we do, not take praise or blame. He must remind himself that it is they, the gunas themselves, who are really the doers of all deeds, not he. But this takes rigorous discrimination and uncompromising detachment. He observes them while remaining apart, at one with the Atman. We can catch ourselves, just like a good actor who observes people. We can observe ourselves, catch ourselves, doing silly things, pretending to be holier than thou. He regards happiness and suffering, praise and blame, riches and poverty with an equal eye, never allowing himself to give way to elation or despair, being even-minded. He feels no lack of anything. In other words, we don't crave anything. Krishna tells Arjuna, if a man worships me with unfaltering love, he will go beyond these three gunas. Now, there are 5 types of relationships an aspirant can have with God. There's the Shanta relationship, peaceful relationship. So there, in that relationship, there is no madness or intensity of love. It's very peaceful. Then there is that of the Dasya, the servant. An aspirant considers himself or servant or herself a servant of the Lord. This is all mental. And in that, one no longer considers God's greatness and his glories. One is simply the servant to the master. Then there's Sakya, a friend. Equal love flows between the devotee and God. God is my companion. Sri Ramakrishna saw in mystic vision that Swami Brahmananda was a shepherd boy of Vrindavan. Swami Brahmananda was what is called an Ishvarakoti, an ever-free soul. And close to Maharaja's passing, he himself had that vision of his eternal relationship with Sri Ramakrishna as friend and playmate. On his deathbed, he began to describe his visions. Ah, that inexpressible life, Ramakrishna, the Krishna of my Ramakrishna. I am the shepherd boy. Put anklets on my feet. I want to dance with my Krishna. I want to hold his hand. The little boy Krishna. Ah, Krishna, my Krishna, you have come, the sweet one. Vatsalya is the next type of relationship with God, in which the devotee looks upon God as a child. Just as we do at Christmas time, we look upon Jesus as a baby, or we look upon the baby Gopala. We are the parent. Gopala is the child. In this relationship, the devotee loses awareness of God's power and loses the feelings of awe and reverence that keep God at a distance from the devotee. Then there is Madhura. That is the last relationship of divine love. There is the story of Mirabai, a woman saint who loved Sri Krishna. She renounced her husband, a king, and went to live in Vrindavan. At that time, another saint and disciple of Chaitanya lived there. Mirabai wanted to meet this holy man, but he refused, saying that he did not want to see any woman. She then retorted that she did not know that any man lived in Vrindavan except Sri Krishna, her beloved. Hearing this, the holy man ran to meet this woman saint. Speaking of this divine relationship, Vivekananda explained, When that madness comes in your brain, when you understand the blessed gopis, then you will understand what love is. When the whole world will vanish, when all other considerations will have died out, when you will become pure, pure-hearted, with no other aim, not even the search after truth, then and then alone will come to you the madness of that love, the strength and the power of that infinite love which the gopis had. That love, for love's sake, that is the goal. When you have got that, you have got everything.